Jenny. I'm here today to do a 2019 reading wrap up. It's hard to believe that the year is already over, but it is, and we are already into 2020. And I just wanted to share with you how well I did following up on my goals from the beginning of the year. Okay, so I kind of picked some categories that I wanted to tackle in 2019, and I think it really was a breakthrough for me in many ways, because what ended up being a goal to listen to one audiobook a month was the way that I was able to push my reading up to another level. Now, I know it's not really about the numbers, it's about how much I'm enjoying my reading and how much I'm getting out of it, but I really felt a sense of fulfillment being able to listen to a lot of books because it was able to just get me more exposure to books that I really wanted to read in a way that worked really well with my schedule. When I drive to work, I've got about half an hour in total that I can listen to an audiobook, so that's a really great time for me. And also when I'm working on my art. The one thing that did suffer from my audiobooks though was podcasts. So I didn't listen to as many podcasts this year as I usually do because I substituted that time for audiobooks. I wanted to read one audiobook a month, and I actually surpassed that. I was able to add a few extra ones in there, which was really great. And it really all depends on how long the audiobooks are, how many I can get into a month. But I was really pleased with being able to listen to the books that I did. Some of them had absolutely fantastic narrators. And during Vlogmas, I made a video recommending 5 of the audiobooks that I listened to this year. So I will link that down below in the description box if you haven't had a chance to watch it yet. And those are essentially the top 5 audiobooks that I just found the most enjoyable for the year. I had 2 goals that kind of go side by side, so I wanted to just discuss them, clarify them a little bit here. I wanted to read at least one Canadian author a month, and I wanted to read at least one First Nations based book. So whether it's by a First Nations Indigenous author or whether it's got subject matter surrounding First Nations history, that was the goal. And they are separate in my mind, and I just wanted to clarify that in case anyone's confused about why I would consider an Indigenous author from Canada to not be considered a Canadian author. And that is really because I just wanted to differentiate between the perspectives. So someone writing from a Canadian perspective who has come here from a white settler culture is going to have a very different perspective on being Canadian, on living in this part of the world, than someone who is Indigenous. And so I did keep those separate, and I did purposefully do that. I made another video during Vlogmas that was all a discussion regarding reading Canadian literature for a year. And so I will link that as well in the description box if you're interested in understanding kind of a survey of the Canadian books that I read this year. The First Nation books that I read, I ended up reading 10 different First Nation writers. And I think that it gave me a really great survey of the breadth of Indigenous literature in Canada. And it really inspired me to want to read more and understand more and read more from these authors. And I feel really fortunate that I have such great access to so many different perspectives, so many different Indigenous people from different parts of Canada. And I am really looking forward to continuing that in the future and understanding more of Indigenous literature in this country. It's nice to contrast those 2 categories. It's nice to try to read from the same area, but those 2 different perspectives. And it was a very eye-opening and wonderful journey that I'm very grateful that I was able to do this year. I had 3 books that I had picked out at the beginning of the year, last year. that I wanted to work into my year. They were large books. They were all over 500 pages. And the reason I wanted to plan that out in 2019 was because I found that in 2018, I did a poor job and I ended up with these huge books at the end of the year that I wanted to get to that I didn't. And so I wanted to space them out. So I ended up reading those 3 books. I think I read one in January, one in April, and one in November and December. And that worked really well for me. So if you are interested in incorporating more longer books into your TBR, it is a strategy that I would recommend. Just pick 3 from your TBR and designate a month where those are going to get read, because so much can come into your TBR from all different directions. And if you don't pre-plan, you just end up getting to the end of the year and realizing that you've never gotten to any of those big books. I also read 17 nonfiction books this year, and nonfiction continues to be just an important part of my overall reading experience, and one that I just can't value enough as time moves on. I ended up reading quite a few nonfiction through audio, so through listening, and I think that format is just perfect for enhancing the experience, because it's so much like listening to a podcast or listening to the news or learning in a lecture of sorts when you're in school. So it's just, if it's done well, it's a perfect way to consume more nonfiction. The last goal I wanted to discuss with you today is the goal to read a poetry collection each month. I ended up reading 11 poetry collections. I also read The Poet X, and that book was actually a novel with poetry format. So I didn't really consider it to be a poetry collection as such, but I did, it was something that I read. So I've really enjoyed surveying poetry, seeking out poetry, and incorporating it more into my reading. It was really enriching for me to read more poetry this year and to be so strategic about it. So I knew that I was looking for poetry collections. I purchased a few poetry collections, and I also sought them out specifically on my TBR each month. And it was a really rewarding thing to do, and I really enjoyed having that there and reading poems in between. Before I would start reading a chapter of a book, I would read a couple poems, and then I would end up getting through 11 different poetry collections. I'm not really going to talk about too many highlights of the year in terms of what I was reading. I did review my favorite poetry collection of 2019 as well, and I'll put that in the description box. It's been a great reading year. I read more books this year than I've ever read in my life. So I figured that being strategic about my reading and planning it as I have has been a really, really great, has had a really, really great result for me. I plan to create another video very soon talking to you about my 2020 goals and the things I'm going to be participating in. I'm also going to make a separate video talking about the Reading Through the Ages challenge, which I completed and I'm very happy about. So I'll just go through the reads that I read for that project and tell you about some highlights of them in that video. So thank you so much for watching, and I will be back again soon with some more videos for you.